But so I've been working in Brazilian Amazonia for quite long already, and I have collaborated mostly with the Apurina people. They are Arawakan speakers. I've been also working with the Marginary people, and I've been also working, well, not intensively, but I've been also working with Hunikuin people, the Panoan-speaking people, also known as Kashinawa people. And for a long time, I've been collaborating with Sami scholars, and we have had several research projects together in this university and also with other northern universities. I've been collaborating with Sami scholars from Kautokeino and University of Tromsø, and actually University of Tromsø is the only university in Europe that holds the Indigenous Studies program. So we have Indigenous Studies minor package here at the University of Helsinki, and in Tromsø you can actually do a master degree in Indigenous Studies. But before going to my talk, I would like to make a short prologue. And I would like to show a few news headlines from Brazilian media. These are just from the last week, and they are in Portuguese, but I'm sure you have also seen lots of things mentioned in media about Amazonia. Well, in the August started the forest fires in the Amazon, but because of the new political climate after the election of Jair Bolsonaro, many things have happened in Brazil, and here are just few pickups from the last week. So the first piece of news says that deforestation has increased 74% inside indigenous areas that should be protected by law. Then just very recently, the FUNAI's special sector for indigenous people living in voluntary isolation got a new chief, and that chief is a missionary person who now plans to evangelize indigenous people in voluntary isolation. And many people are really critical towards this because this would mean genocide of the people who are not resistant for viruses. And he has bought already helicopter in order to make his trips to these isolated areas. The third news talks about the initiative that Bolsonaro made in order to open indigenous areas and other protected areas for mega projects, extractive projects, and also for different type of economic activities. And this law was already passed, and now it will go to the Congress. And this piece of news here in the corner says that the indigenous territory Haposa Cerrado Sul is invaded by gold miners. So they are already inside the territory, and the nation state is not really doing anything to get them out from the territory. And the last piece of news says that the Ministry of Environment how could I say, finishes the contract of few principal authorities that have been fighting against the climate change. So this was just very randomly chosen piece of news, but this is the prologue to my lecture, so you understand the context where I'm working and how the situation has changed drastically since the election of Jair Bolsonaro. So my paper today draws on the concept of biocultural heritage, and biocultural approaches have been increasing in various fields of academia and civil society, especially in debates about conservation, biodiversity, and community well-being. So there are a few works that I have listed here. So there are Louisa Maffey's work on biocultural diversity, where she actually really shows how biological diversity are in the very same places where we have very high cultural and linguistic diversity. And there are other works related to conservation, well-being, sustainability, and about well-being in relation to biocultural landscapes. But in this paper I talk about biocultural heritage, and it can be understood in the context of relational ontologies or social systems in which non-human entities and natural environment cannot be separated from being a human. And actually also in legal texts there have been discussion about biocultural rights. For instance, in the study by Kapir, Sangai, Pavi, Katte and Tom Bennett, who talked about traditional stewardship, resources and management of the land. When we talk about heritage, it's important to note that cultural heritage as a concept is very new and related to modernist discourses, as well as diverse political and economic practices. And human societies are involved in selective process regarding certain elements that are preserved for the future. But so heritage should be seen as a process rather than an object of itself. It's really it's a construct related and depending on the different actors. And throughout human history, cultural heritage has played an important role as the property of nations, for instance, and many nation states have used discourses of cultural heritage in their nation building, but on the other hand, old values have often been regarded holding back modern nation states. But beyond the state-led heritage discussions, my question here is a little bit different. I'm interested to examine how do the Amazonian indigenous communities themselves protect biocultural heritage at the very communal level. And this study draws quite a lot from my recent article entitled In Ancestors' Times and Protection of Amazonian Biocultural Heritage. So here I'm really building on my ethnographic data on human environment interactions within Amazonian indigenous communities, where the findings really underline how Amazonian indigenous history, person making and future crafting can really be separated from the environment. Here is a map of the Amazon regions, as for you to remember how big the area is actually and how important it is for the whole planet. Of course I shall mention that the biodiversity that we have today in the Amazon area, it consists about 1/4, or according to some calculations, 1/5 of the world's biodiversity, and biodiversity is very crucial in climate change and adaptation and many other environmental issues. Well, I don't have the space here to really elaborate more on indigenous peoples of Brazil, but they are numerous. There are really rich language diversity, and the diversity between different indigenous groups is also important to note, because there are indigenous people who live in voluntary isolation. There are people who live in urban areas, and among the Apurina people, I'm really now focusing on the Apurina people, we also have this very wide diversity, because I've been working, for instance, with the community of the Tumia. The photo is from Tumia, and they live 5/7 river journey distance from the closest urban area. But there are also Apurinas who live in urban areas, and I've been even co-authoring some academic papers with my Apurina colleague, who just defended his PhD dissertation in anthropology last August. The Apurina people, as I showed in the previous slide, they number some 7,000 people. They live mostly in the state of Amazonas, but also in the urban areas of Acre. They identify themselves as Pupunkari, as many other indigenous people in Amazonia that would translate as real humans. And they are divided into two patrilineal cross-marine communities. They are fishing, hunting, and gathering communities who also practice swidden agriculture. They mostly live along the Purus River, the very same region where there have been found these massive monumental geometric earthworks, and I'm also involved in the archaeological project addressing those archaeological sites. The Apurina are divided to over 20 communities, and I'm now talking mostly about the Tumia community here, but I've been working in many other communities. These are maps prepared by my linguist colleagues. In red, she marked communities where there has been linguist studies, and I've been visiting also most of them. Just about the recent changes in the area. So now, as I'm very often talking with Pupunkaris, the Apurina, the recent piece of news what I received is that the whole area of the central Purus River would be turned into the massive tourist reserve, and it would be taken over by private people. But we don't have any further news about those plans. I just would like to mention that my work is really based on collaborative work and community-based methods, and I'm really interested also in advancing and developing indigenous research methods, thinking of how do the Apurina know, how do they produce their knowledge, and I'm constantly producing my own knowledge through their methods of knowing. This is very typical for indigenous studies, that different types of methods are brought in a decolonizing way to academia. And in my studies, I've been drawing from so-called relational ontologies or relational epistemologies. You can also talk about relational social systems, but what it means is that beings exist in relations with each others. So this is core at the Amazonian thinking, that people come to exist. They are educated in relations to other humans and plants, animals, and many other non-humans. I'm also interested in now this work that I'm presenting to you. I'm also interested in anthropological theories of time, as discussed, for instance, by Anthony Gell, Mayan Thrift, Nicola Sorinchaiko, among others, who have revealed how temporalities and cultural orientations of time affect lived experiences of people. And drawing on my co-living with Apurina and conversational types of dialogues, my argument today is that the protection and strengthening of Amazonian cultural heritage should be understood not only through ontological aspects, but it also involves temporal trajectories that affect the perception and memorizing, both at cognitive level and at the level of embodied experience. Biocultural heritage practices in particular and its community-based protection embed the accountability of humans towards non-human others, and highlights a shared experience of entanglements of human and non-human entities and their dialectical relationship and relatedness under cultural protocols in which entities are dependent on each other and there are no independent actors. And in the end, I will also a little bit reflect on the discussion on the Anthropocene and what has been thought about the era called Anthropocene. But so now, finally starting my paper, I would like to talk about the ancestral forests and Amazonian animated lands. And these are pictures from the Tumia. And for my Apurina research collaborators, the ancestors' knowledge and actions are present and visible in the contemporary diversity of plants and animals, among other things. The Apurina forests are greatly a product of previous and present generations. Along the Tumia River in the central Purus and many other affluents of the Purus River, so there's the Purus River, there are headwaters in the Andes. Purus River is one of the rivers flowing to the river as we know as Amazonas, the biggest river system by the quantity of the waters. So Tumia is one of the affluents of the Purus. So their ancestors' previous settlement places and gardens can be observed in different vegetation, revealing a biocultural heritage that is materialized in collective and individual ways of moving through the land and using its resources. There are historical places that for mobile Apurina who are traveling by canoes, trekking to collect resources, hunting, fishing, to visit their kin, or to take care of other issues such as their health, care in the cities or buying merchandise in urban areas. Also, these places also affect them very emotionally. And it becomes evident that many of these places are actually by the smaller tributaries of the Tumia, and they are named according to the non-human encounters and perceptions. Also, the smaller affluents of the Tumia River that have these historical places, the very names of the rivers come from these human environment encounters. And I was actually requested by the community and by the local Indigenous state Indigenous agency, FUNAI. I was asked actually to prepare a map because a few years ago they planned to expand the demarcated area. So just briefly, here is the Purus River that way, and here is the other headwaters of the smaller tributary, that Purus affluent, and here only the half of the Tumia affluent is demarcated for the Apurina people. But in fact, they have been inhabiting all the river until the mouth of the river when it meets the Purus River. So here, really collecting the information from different people, especially from the elders, we could name all the different smaller rivers, and they are rivers of different animals or trees or so on. So for instance, we have the Purenaruan in the end refers to something liquid, so it's a river, so it's a tributary of the bamboos. We have a Untian, river of the bigger owl. We have a river of ants, Kachipukuria, and so on. So the whole name system shows different histories of human environment encounters. The Tumia affluent also hosts in its all length ancient slash and burn fields, Sweden's gardens called Sankanani, in Portuguese we could say capoeiras, where still today grow wild bananas and several plants associated with ancestors' influence in the forest transformation. Even if the knowledge of the ancestors is shared by means of the stories, it is also evident in specific cultivated products, such as in Apurina names we call them Mutu, Kataki, Wayaki, Chuki, Yumimpi, and Iaya, that are not found among the other neighboring peoples, and their seeds are shared internally. These anthropogenic patches show the ways in which the Apurina managed their forests what the ancestors planted, grew, ate, and how they fed their little ones. Here I would like to show a little or short ethnographic example of the generational ties of these locations. So when I was passing the Masaya tributary with one of my main Apurina interlocutors, Abel, who also has given me my Apurina name, Iriana, and he's very knowledgeable in the history of the river. He's there at the end of the canyon. And we stopped and visited one of the previous settlements, where he soon pointed out a couple of kupuasu trees, which his uncle, Sikeira, had planted. Abel told that at that time, when Sikeira had planted them, these fruits, he had himself been just a boy, and now he was at his 40s. He explained about the place, where the gardens had been situated, where were the different paths that still connected the previous and current settlements and other places to other ones. And Abel drew my attention to several edible fruits of that place. And we enjoyed one of the forest fruits together, not only specific for Apurina diets, but also with very specific taste and eating in specific ways. So the emotions and memories related to the place and landscape, the experience of the landscape was very corporal and connected to the people and the previous generations. Even if the fruit we ate in the Masaya tributary grows non-cultivated, it is protected by the community. The same applies for the present Tukuma palms that are still growing in the place, which according to Abel originated because his kin had been eating Tukuma palm fruits there. His ancestors' knowledge and actions were then present and visible in the contemporary landscape. And in fact, Amazonian forests have been largely domesticated since pre-colonial times. And actually in one article that is now in print, and I co-authored with a biologist, with an archaeologist and a paleontologist, and we talk about indigenous ideas of domestication and how they are actually based on ideas of care, respect, selection and protection. And it really looks at the idea of domestication and how it's not only a kind of like linear process, but it can be sometimes also a non-linear process in indigenous Amazonia. So today, when the Apurina who are highly mobile, when they travel by canoes or when they trek through the lands, they very often stop in these sankananis and they can eat the fruits from the previous gardens. There are also the medicinal plants that they can come and collect. There are springs that offer them drinking water, and so forth. Hiemstra and colleagues in their book on biocultural landscapes, they state that biocultural landscapes are reciprocal human landscape relationships, and they provide a sense of place and home, as well as supply a place for inspiration and creation that contributes to overall well-being. And interestingly, the Apurina present forest management practices are based on the technique that after a certain time, when the land has been resting and grown over, the people return to the very same gardens to make new gardens. And this can take several generations. So the forest is cultivated only in some places. And there are many studies on pre-colonial societies, and they show that the same type of method has been used in pre-colonial times. But overall, the Amazon forest is largely anthropogenic forest, where people have trekked, collected resources, and left their marks over thousands of years. So indigenous inhabitants have traveled and dwelled if we want to use the term by Tim Ingold, through the lands, and they've been accompanied by the animals and different plants which they domesticated and managed. So human movements also impacted the movements of plants and animals, which had their own influence on the formation of the landscape. So it's not only human influence, and actually when we talk about anthropogenic forest, this very concept is a little bit misleading. And the Sonkananis, they also are known by their past owners, like this is Sankanani of my grandfather, this is Sankanani of my uncle, and the patches of different vegetation really talk to people, but they can be invisible for the non-indigenous visitors in the rivers if they are not revealed by the Apurinau stories of these places. And people really remember about different events, what has happened in these places, like births, deaths, diseases, communal festivities, rituals, marriages, and so forth. And actually many landscape studies have shown how places can be related by the acts of remembering and recalling, like Ellen Basso has talked about this, and Fernando Santos Granero talking about the topography of the landscape. I already mentioned that the Tumia River is demarcated only, half of it is demarcated, but actually when mapping the Tumia River, people remembered different events happening in the history throughout the river, and there are names, Apurinau names for each smaller tributary. So here we have actually the whole river pictured. The upper part of the tributary is demarcated and the lower part is not, and they cannot actually even collect their Brazil nuts or any other forest resources. There are other people who come there and use those resources. Ownership is interesting question, an important question in the Amazon area, and many stories really educate about owners of the places, but these owners are not humans. The lands and forests, they have a non-human owners, and while moving along the rivers and fishing, as well as extracting any forest resources, the Apurinau pay attention to the places of the so-called chief or owner spirits. These spirit beings are very often related to certain palm trees like Mauritia palms, Puritiranas, Samaumas, Murmurus, and Taboka bamboos, but also to some other landscape differences. And there are also owner spirits of the forest animals, so the game has their own forest spirit, their own owner spirit, and this is really based on the Amazonian indigenous idea of ownership and mastership, that entities are owned and controlled by someone, but in the meantime they are cared and nourished. So there is a reciprocal relationship. Both are caring for each other and nourishing each other. So the subjectivities, they depend on each other, but the relations can be symmetrical or asymmetrical. It can be a relation where the other person is really controlled by the master. And examples of these relations are materialized in relationships of parents and their children, shamans and their auxiliary spirits, in pet keeping, or leaders and their followers. Actually, me and Alvaro, we just co-authored an article and we reviewed different previous research work on this topic, and this kind of idea is also typical for Siberian indigenous people and many other indigenous people in other geographic locations. But here, for the Apurina, for instance, the leader of the community is called Awinte, or to say our leader, Ata Awinte. And so the very same word, leader, chief, Awinte, is used for the, let's say, for master of the Purichi palms. So it's Kinyari Awinte. And these leaders of non-humans are really seen in the framework that we could call as animist thinking. So the forest and waters, they have their own communities, the spirits have their own foods, musical instruments, healing medicines, rituals, and so forth. And especially the places of the master spirits are called the houses, and these people try to avoid, and they also employ respect affecting the land management practices. So the houses of the master spirits, they are in fact charged entities, and they have highly ambivalent transformative capacities for those who are moving in their vicinity. They can call illnesses, or because the chief spirits can send their invisible arrows that only shamans know how to cure, but they also can give strength, stamina, and heartiness. The places operate as an enabling to the continued vitality and take forward to the future. And they also affect the structures that maintain and reproduce balance in community. And actually the shamans of the community, they can only receive their powers from these chief spirits. So the local biopolitics is about life making as well as knowledge making with these non-humans. And people can communicate, they're communicating with these spirit beings through songs, body paintings, musical instruments, different foods, in their dreams and art, such as geometric designs. And the elders and parents in particular, they guide people, and they, as they say in Apurina language, they make people in interactions with non-humans and other humans. So Apurina relational ontologies, they embed the idea of reciprocity, mutual nurturing, and protective actions towards the master spirits and other personified entities of the land, and therefore these places and subjectivities are cared for and respected, and they give life and contribute to life making. Here we visited one of the places of such a master spirits, but according to Alfredo, older man in the community, the master spirit didn't live there anymore, but many people didn't pass close to that place, yet the subjectivity was no longer living in that place. Okay, but so I see that the time is running very quickly. I didn't know that this takes actually longer for me to come to this part that I think is the most interesting for you. How do the community actually protect their own biocultural heritage? But before that, I would like to mention a little bit more about, not only about the places of the chief spirits, but also the so-called sacred places, and they are called kymururi. Actually, that place was previously also called Kymururi, and it means a place of the past shamans. So in each Apurina territory there are Kymururi's. These are places where they past shamans, spirits are today, and they are places that are actually avoided to go too close, and there shouldn't be too much noise close to those places, so they should be left actually untouched. And many Apurinans say that these days these sacred places are disturbed by the noise of the chainsaws and cars and other infrastructure that are coming closer and closer to the sacred sites. And also other detail I want to mention briefly is that lots of Apurinans ecological knowledge is based on the sounds and movements of the animals, and the different animals that they think that are the most important indicator animals are actually thought of being the ancient shamans. So they think that the shamans that have already passed away, they are still guiding them through different sounds. So the sound of the different birds, for instance, can tell when there is a game close to the village, or if there are some people arriving to the area, because there are no any other communication systems. So you can see that there are different time scales, because there are different subjectivities that are really associated with different places and different sounds, and sensing different senses that people have in the places. And this time scales, they cause diverse imaginations and orientations of for the engagement with the environment. And in Apurinan's case, the biocultural landscape really reflect different timescales, and they have numerous consequences for actual practices for the use of the forest resources. The Apurinan biocultural landscape and its time frames should be understood in the context of long-standing lived experiences that are about specific relationships with the land and memorizing the ancestors' actions, practices, and knowledge. The ancestral time, however, is not from the distant mythical past, even if there are stories about ancient time that are marked linguistically by the term Kitchakaparinka in the ancient times. And in the same vein, the owner and chief spirits are not only beings of the mythological distant past, even if there are stories about them, but they are living and acting entities here and now, yet they are in a parallel worlds. So this is very important biocultural heritage of the community, and the important way of protecting it is to pass stories of these beings only among the Apurina people. These stories are told among the community, and in that way they really protect the richness and the health of the ecological relations in which their ancestors are a crucial part. Also, Ellen Balso has noted similarly about the Western Apaches naming locations within the landscape. And for the Apurinatis, the stories that they tell, they really affirm the value and validity of the ancestral knowledge when they mention different places. They convey sentiments of personal and collective support, which offer practical advice for their personal situations, and it offers emotional healing. Well, the place names can be told to other people if other people understand to ask for them, because many times the neighboring peoples, they think that there are only the names that are today known in Portuguese, and the Apurina names are very rarely are mentioned. For instance, in the maps, as you can imagine, there are no any of these names. But besides the oral transmission among the community, mostly traditional knowledge is also transmitted non-verbally, as Aboriginal knowledge is materialized and expressed in the body paintings, healing, craft work, livelihoods, governance structures, and social organization. So here you can see two photos of different geometric designs that are applied on human body, on headdresses, ceramics, and many other material elements, and they really refer to different master spirits. Furthermore, secrecy of the places is also one of the tactics in the protection of the biocultural heritage, and especially Aboriginal shamans and elders and village leaders, they guide village members to behave in a proper way when talking about their history, so that it can be protected. And secrecy is one of the tactics among many different indigenous peoples. Sami scholar Elina Helena Renvall has described how silence and secrecy is important for Sami communities. If I quote her and the colleague of hers, Markkula, they wrote in a recent publication, another reason for this secretiveness of Sami relates to the risk that outsiders misappropriate their traditional knowledge, the Sami traditional knowledge. As soon as this knowledge becomes oral or published in print, and therefore measures are taken locally to prevent the flow of information from the traditional knowledge holders to non-members of the community. And end of quote. Thus, secrecy and verbal and non-verbal communication are important ways of transmitting cultural heritage, depending on the subject and subject relations. Also, Mary Patist and James Sakei Younghood Henderson has written about indigenous cultural heritage and traditional knowledge, and they point to the importance how indigenous traditional knowledge, for instance, is described and documented for the next generations. For instance, now with the Apurina, we are planning to have a project to protect the sacred sites, but it's very important they are not mapped on the, for instance, on maps, but the community can have space. We can have, for instance, funding for organizing the meetings where people can exchange the knowledge, and we could actually develop such cultural heritage practices that could be respectful for their own practices and ways of generating knowledge. Briefly about the temporalities. So in Amazonian cultural understandings, we really see non-linearity and multiplicity of time, but they have been very little discussed in previous works on environmental issues. But I think they offer a new way of thinking. Here, for instance, we can see the importance of intergenerational time, and it's very specific in certain time spaces. Time space is a concept used by Trift and May when they talk about geographies of time. So there are different time scales, and these different time scales, they also have their own aesthetics, and especially in indigenous arts, this specific time scale can become materialized and visible. So the time is an important lens to Amazonian life worlds, and it shows how indigenous biocultural landscapes are in fact co-produced in constantly remodified relations between present humans and non-humans of different times. And they cannot restrict it to linear time. At least these beings, they create certain perspectives for people. They behave in certain ways because they are thinking of those non-human subjectivities, and these really define certain type of actions. In Amazonia, of course, we can observe different qualities of time, but we can also observe different rhythms. For instance, in Apuna territories, there are slow rhythms. People are waiting, growing things. There are maybe no exchanges with others, but there are also very fast rhythms, such as when hunting, building, preparing things, trapping, harvesting. And there is also cyclical time of seasons based on weather conditions and livelihoods. And there are also periods of radical change, especially because of personal growth or transformation. For instance, when people pass from puberty to adulthood, and it's really marked by a specific important ritual in the communities. So there are different time scales. So it's important to understand that Apurina biocultural heritage should be looked at relationally in the context of long-standing lived experiences and specific type of relationships with the land that today still mediate memories, remembering and reflections on the past that guide the present and the future. Especially in the community, the rituals are the places of educating about these time scales and different subjectivities, but so are the place names and the visits to the places and eating certain fruits, for instance, as I showed in my ethnographic example from the previous gardens. And for instance, in this area, I just want to show a few pictures. That there are the prehistoric, pre-colonial monumental earthworks, and they were constructed about 3,000, 2,000 years ago. Mm. So Amazonia really is not an area where people wouldn't have history. We can't talk about Amazonian peoples as people without history, as they are often represented. So if we talk about now legal protection of biocultural heritage, well, cultural heritage, indigenous cultural heritage is protected by Brazil's constitution of 1988, by ILO convention. Brazil has ratified ILO convention 169. There is a UNTRIP 2007, mentions cultural heritage, UNESCO 2003 convention on intangible heritage, and convention on biological diversity. But still today, indigenous peoples are very rarely taken to any negotiation tables, or even when different legal systems are created. I think I've been talking for very, very long. But so if we think now, for whom does cultural heritage exist? How is it shared? By whom is it decided? So here I hope it became evident that it's not only shared or decided by humans, it's co-produced with non-humans through different type of interactions, but also by avoidances and limitations. Lastly, maybe I would like to say that I think Amazonian biocultural heritage and its temporal orientations bring good ways to approach indigenous environmental justice today. Because as we know, there have been drastical disruptors in indigenous life worlds, and today they have really hard times in continuing their lives in the ways as they would like to create their futures, And it's very important that they have different allies, such as NGOs or conservation agencies or researchers or many others who are acting together with indigenous peoples. But I think that there is a big difference, and one of the difference between these different actors is, for instance, the concept of time and understanding the temporal timescales in the forest. And briefly, this is really my last slide. I would like to reflect a little bit on the Anthropocene in Amazonia. So I guess you all have been reading the article by historian Dibes Chakraparty, and he has argued that the idea of the Anthropocene, the new geological epoch when humans exist as a geological force, severely qualifies humanist histories of modernity and globalization. So he is really bringing the idea to these discussions that there are different human histories. Well, I would like to say that there are also histories of the non-humans that should be put into this picture. Well, we can say that the Anthropocene, as archaeologist Anna Roosevelt says, Anthropocene started in the Amazon already 10,000 years ago. So there is a long presence of humans in the Amazon. But it became very radical only in the modern era, especially since the 70s. And today I think we really need to decolonize discussions on the Anthropocene, because it puts all the humans in the same package. So these are kind of like questions that I would like to bring into this end, and we should, I really think that we should look critically at these discussions on Anthropocene. That's it. Thank you.